Ambassador Lee Minho walked through the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Council station, his footsteps echoing softly against the crystal walls. The massive structure orbited the neutron star Nexus Prime, its artificial gravity keeping thousands of alien diplomats comfortable as they conducted the business of 100 worlds. Today, however, the usual atmosphere of measured debate had been replaced by something Minho had rarely seen in his 20 years of service: pure terror. The emergency session hall buzzed with frantic activity. Holographic displays showed star maps with entire sectors marked in ominous red. Communication arrays crackled with desperate messages from the outer rim, each one more horrifying than the last. Minho took his designated seat among the human delegation, his face maintaining the same calm expression that had made him legendary among galactic negotiators. Order. We must have order. The council chairman's forearms gestured wildly as he tried to control the chaos. The Altarian's blue skin had turned pale, and his usually melodious voice carried a tremor that betrayed his fear. Ambassador Vextar of the Kethvar hegemony will present his fleet's report. Commander Vextar rose from his seat, his reptilian form towering over most of the assembly. The warrior's scales, normally a proud golden hue, had darkened to the bronze color that indicated deep distress among his people. Honored Council, he began, his voice a low growl that resonated through the chamber's translation systems. The Third Fleet encountered the entities at the Kepler boundary. Our ships. There were no survivors. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. The Kethvar Third Fleet consisted of over 200 vessels, including their newest Dreadnought-class battleships. For such a force to be completely eliminated was unprecedented in galactic history. Show them, Vextar commanded his aide. The central holographic display flickered to life, revealing grainy combat footage from a Kethvar destroyer's final moments. The image showed vast organic-looking entities emerging from what appeared to be tiers in space itself. The creatures moved with fluid grace, their forms shifting and changing as they engulfed entire starships. Where they touched, metal dissolved, and energy weapons simply absorbed into their writhing mass. They consumed everything, Vextar continued, his clawed hands clenching into fists. Our plasma cannons, our quantum torpedoes, nothing affected them. They ate our ships like prey animals feeding. Counselor Park Ji-woo leaned forward in his seat, studying the footage with the analytical mind that had made him Earth's premier military theorist before he'd transitioned to diplomacy. Unlike his colleagues who showed their emotions openly, Ji-woo's expression remained neutral. This wasn't callousness. It was trained observation, the mark of someone who understood that panic was the enemy of clear thinking. The Zephyrian delegate, a tall crystalline being whose faceted body normally refracted light in beautiful patterns, stood next. Today, those patterns flickered erratically with distress. The border defense grid my people spent 3 centuries constructing was breached in less than 6 hours. These entities don't follow standard tactical doctrines. They phase through energy barriers, ignore gravitational fields, and seem to predict our movements before we make them. More reports followed, each more disturbing than the last. The insectoid hive collective had lost 3 entire worlds before they could evacuate their billions of inhabitants. The machine intelligences of the synthesis reported that their automated defense systems had been somehow corrupted, turning against their creators. Even the powerful Dominion fleets with their legendary plasma artillery had been forced into full retreat. Minho listened to each testimony with growing concern. In 3 centuries of galactic citizenship, humanity had established itself as the go-to species for creative problem-solving. When the Altarians and Velthari had gone to war over mining rights, human mediators had found a solution that benefited both sides. When the Great Plague had swept through Zephyrian space, human medical researchers had developed the cure. Earth's reputation was built on finding peaceful solutions to seemingly impossible problems. But this was different. This was war on a scale the galaxy hadn't seen since the ancient times before the Council had established the current peace. And Minho knew something that none of the other species suspected. Humanity remembered those ancient times very well. Perhaps, the Council chairman said, his voice cutting through the murmur of frightened conversations. Our human colleagues might offer some insight. Your species has always demonstrated remarkable adaptability in crisis situations. All eyes turned to the human delegation. Minho rose slowly, feeling the weight of expectation from dozens of species. Behind his calm exterior, his mind was racing. The careful image humanity had cultivated over 3 centuries, that of peaceful traders, brilliant scientists and wise mediators, was about to be tested. We would be honored to assist the Council in any way possible, Minho replied, his voice carrying the same measured tone that had diffused 100 diplomatic crises. However, we will need to consult our historical archives. There may be precedents from Earth's past that could prove relevant. He caught Jiwoo's eye across the chamber. The military liaison's slight nod confirmed what Minho already knew. It was time to access files that had been sealed since humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. As the emergency session concluded with plans for evacuation fleets and refugee camps, Minho walked through the station's corridors with Jiwoo beside him. Other species hurried past them, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of fear and confusion. The archives, Jiwoo said quietly once they were alone. Should I send the activation codes to Earth? Minho paused at the viewing port, looking out at the swirling cosmic storms around Nexus Prime. Somewhere out there, beyond the peaceful glow of civilized space, an ancient hunger was awakening. The galaxy's guardians had failed, and now they were looking to humanity for salvation. Send the signal, Minho said finally. Tell Command that the Devourer protocol is active. 300 years of sleep are about to end. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Dr. Kim Tae-hyun stood before the most heavily guarded door in human space. The titanium steel barrier stretched 20 meters high and bore no markings except for a single inscription in ancient Korean: "What sleeps may wake when honor calls." His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as quantum scanners verified his identity down to the molecular level. The authorization sequence required 3 separate codes, each held by different branches of Earth's government. Tae-hyun's fingers moved across the holographic interface, inputting passwords that hadn't been used since humanity's first contact with alien civilization. The final code came directly from Earth's president, transmitted just hours ago with a message that made Tae-hyun's blood run cold. The galaxy bleeds, wake the ancestors. As the massive doors began their slow retreat into the mountain, ancient hydraulics groaning after centuries of silence, Tae-hyun felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The air that escaped from the sealed chamber carried the scent of oiled metal and old leather, as if the very atmosphere remembered the tools of war that lay within. The Terran military archive stretched out like a cathedral dedicated to conflict. Holographic projectors awakened one by one, casting ghostly images of battles fought across millennia. Ancient stone tablets bearing Sun Tzu's wisdom stood beside quantum storage matrices containing the tactical genius of Napoleon Bonaparte. The digital ghosts of Genghis Khan's horse armies galloped past Alexander's phalanx formations, while submarine warfare tactics from Earth's great wars merged seamlessly with theoretical space combat doctrines. By the ancestors, breathed Admiral Cho Hee-jin as she stepped into the awakening archives. The woman who commanded Earth's peaceful merchant marine had shed her civilian clothes for the deep blue uniform she hadn't worn in decades. Her graying hair was pulled back in the regulation style of the old Terran Navy, and her eyes held the sharp focus of someone remembering skills deliberately forgotten. Tae-hyun moved to the central command console, his historian's training guiding him through systems designed by military minds. The scope is incredible, Admiral. Every human conflict, every tactical innovation, every strategic breakthrough, it's all here. Look at this. His hands danced across the controls, bringing up a 3-dimensional battle map that showed the evolution of human warfare from Bronze Age chariots to theoretical planet-killer weapons. The Mongol cavalry charges that conquered half of Asia. Tae-hyun pointed to swirling formations of light. Combined with Japanese naval tactics from the Pacific War, adapted for 3-dimensional space combat. The psychological warfare techniques of the Cold War merged with Roman legion discipline. It's like looking at the genetic code of human conflict. Hye-jin studied the readouts with the intensity of a predator awakening from hibernation. Her fingers traced tactical formations that civilian minds would find incomprehensible, but to her military-trained eye, they told stories of triumph and tragedy, of lessons learned in blood and passed down through generations. When did the last military academy graduate active officers? 50 years ago, Tae-hyun replied, pulling up personnel records that scrolled endlessly across the displays. The Treaty of Galactic Harmony required all human military institutions to transition to civilian research. But the bloodlines remember, Admiral. The families have been keeping the traditions alive. Across human space, quantum communication, arrays carried signals that hadn't been transmitted in 3 centuries. On distant colony worlds where humans had built new lives among alien neighbors, encrypted messages arrived at addresses that appeared to be simple family businesses or agricultural cooperatives. But appearances, as the galaxy was about to learn, could be deceiving. On the agricultural world of New Busan, Captain Song Min-jun was checking the automated irrigation systems in his family's rice fields when his personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority message. The device, disguised as a standard farming tool, suddenly displayed military encryption protocols that civilian equipment shouldn't have possessed. As Min-jun read the activation codes, his weathered farmers' hands began to shake, not with fear but with anticipation. The message was brief. Devourer protocol active. Report to staging area 7. Remember who you were before you chose to forget. Min-jun's transformation was subtle but profound. The careful slouch of a man who spent his days bent over crops straightened into the rigid posture of a naval officer. His eyes, which moments before had held the patient wisdom of someone who worked with growing things, now carried the sharp calculation of someone who understood how to destroy them. His alien neighbors, the peaceful Altarian refugees who had shared his dinner table for 20 years, watched in puzzlement as their human friend became something they had never seen before. Similar scenes played out across 100 human worlds. In the asteroid mining stations of the belt, heavy equipment operators received orders to report to coordinates that led to facilities they'd thought were simple maintenance depots. On the beautiful garden world of New Eden, where humans had built a paradise of art and culture, hidden blast doors opened in the sides of mountains that tourists had admired for generations. The transformation was happening everywhere at once. Children who had been taught only the peaceful applications of their heritage began to remember the darker lessons their grandparents had whispered during bedtime stories. Teenagers who had excelled at strategic games suddenly understood that they weren't games at all, but training exercises disguised as entertainment. In the orbital shipyards above Mars, construction crews worked through the night converting civilian vessels with modifications that seemed to appear from blueprints that had never officially existed. Cargo haulers grew weapon hardpoints like mechanical tumors. Passenger liners revealed hidden fighter bays that had been cleverly disguised as recreational facilities. Even the massive agricultural ships that fed the outer colonies sprouted defensive systems that turned farming tools into instruments of war. The galaxy's sleeping giant was stirring, stretching muscles that had been deliberately kept idle for 3 centuries. And as the first human warships began to take shape in the darkness between stars, those who knew their history understood that the universe was about to remember why humanity had once been content to sleep. The archives hummed with activity as forgotten knowledge flowed through quantum channels to every human world. The age of peaceful coexistence was ending, and the age of controlled fury was about to begin. The transmission began at exactly 0600 Earth Standard Time, broadcasting simultaneously across every human settlement in the galaxy. President Yoon, Daeun's face appeared on screens in bustling colony cities, remote mining stations, and peaceful agricultural worlds where humans had built new lives alongside their alien neighbors. Her expression was calm but carried an intensity that many humans recognized from ancestral memories, the look of someone preparing for war. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice carrying the weight of 3 centuries of carefully maintained peace. "For generations we have been the mediators, the bridge builders, the keepers of galactic harmony. We chose this role not from weakness, but from strength. We buried our weapons not because we forgot how to use them, but because we remembered too well what they could do." On the mining station Series 7, Shift Supervisor Kim Dong-woo paused his inspection of the massive ore extractors. Around him, his mixed crew of humans and Velthari workers stopped their tasks to listen. The crystalline aliens had worked alongside humans for decades, never suspecting that their peaceful colleagues harbored secrets that would reshape the galaxy. Today, an enemy threatens not just human worlds but all civilized life, the president continued. The entities we call devourers have shown us that some threats cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be stopped by anything but force. And so, we remember. We wake up. We become who we were before we chose to become who we are. The transformation began immediately. Across human space, emergency protocols that had lain dormant for centuries activated with mechanical precision. Construction codes embedded in every human structure since first contact began executing subroutines that civilian populations had never known existed. On the merchant vessel, Rising Dawn, Captain Lee So-min felt her ship shudder as hidden systems came online. The cargo bays she had used to transport grain and textiles suddenly revealed concealed weapon mounts. The recreational areas where her crew had played games during long journeys split open to reveal fighter launch tubes. Even the ship's decorative hull paneling retracted to expose armor plating that shouldn't have existed on a civilian transport. "Captain," called her navigation officer, Lieutenant Oh Sung-ho, his voice tight with amazement. "The ship's computer is showing systems I've never seen before. Tactical displays, weapon targeting, defensive grids. It's like the Rising Dawn was always a warship pretending to be a freighter." So-min moved to the central command console, her fingers finding controls that felt familiar despite never having used them. Somewhere in her genetic memory, generations of naval officers guided her hands as she brought her transformed vessel to full combat readiness. "Not pretending, Lieutenant. Sleeping. There's a difference." The metamorphosis wasn't limited to spacecraft. On the agricultural world of New Harmony, farmer Park Hyun-soo watched his harvesting robots reconfigure themselves into mobile defense platforms. The grain silos he had filled for 20 years opened to reveal missile batteries that had been disguised as storage facilities. Even his irrigation system began transforming, the water distribution network becoming a communication array that could coordinate planetary defense. The Zephyrian families who had settled alongside the human farmers watched in stunned silence as their neighbors revealed capabilities that redefined everything they thought they knew about humanity. Young Quintel, who had studied human agricultural techniques for his doctoral thesis, approached Park with crystalline features flickering in confusion. "Friend Park," Quintel said, his translator struggling with the emotional concepts, "your farming equipment is becoming weapons. How is this possible? We have lived beside you for decades. You taught my children to grow earth vegetables." Park smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn while teaching alien children to plant tomatoes. But now it carried an edge that made Quintel's crystal structure resonate with unease. "I still grow vegetables, young friend, but I also remember how to protect the fields where they grow. My grandfather fought in the Korean War. My great-grandmother survived the Siege of Seoul. We carry their memories in our blood." The human fleets that assembled at strategic points throughout the galaxy bore no resemblance to the rigid formations favored by other species. Where Kethvar battleships arranged themselves in geometric patterns and Altarian vessels flew in precise lines, human ships moved like schools of fish or flocks of birds. Their formations seemed chaotic to alien observers, but mathematical analysis revealed complex patterns that maximized both offensive capability and defensive coverage. Commander Park Jun-ho stood on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Incheon Rising, watching his tactical displays as human vessels took their positions around the Kepler Junction. His ship had been listed in galactic databases as a deep space research vessel, but the transformation had revealed its true nature, a warship designed to coordinate fleet actions across multiple star systems. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "Admiral Hyejin is requesting fleet status reports." Jun-ho opened the communication channel, his voice carrying across the assembled battle group. "All vessels report ready for combat operations. Weapon systems at full capacity, Defensive screens deployed, fighter squadrons at launch readiness. The response came from dozens of ships that had awakened from their peaceful slumber. Cargo haulers reported their fighter complements. Mining vessels announced their missile batteries online. Even the hospital ship Soul Mercy revealed defensive weapons that could protect the wounded while they healed. Admiral Cho Hye-jin's voice cut through the communications chatter with the authority of someone who had commanded fleets before the galaxy had known peace. Remember, we are not conquerors. We are protectors. We fight not to dominate, but to defend. Show them what controlled fury looks like. The human doctrine of warfare was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Other species fought with the tactics they had developed over millennia: direct assaults, siege warfare, attrition campaigns that ground down enemies through sheer persistence. But humans had spent 10,000 years learning that the greatest victory was the one that required the least fighting. As the first reports of devourer movements reached the human fleet, the crews prepared for battle with a mixture of anticipation and regret. They had hoped never to use these skills again, but the universe had other plans. The sleeping giant was fully awake now, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had once been content to dream. Commander Kim Min-seo stood on the bridge of the destroyer Busan fighter, watching the tactical display with the calm focus of a chess master studying her next move. The Kepler station hung in space before them like a massive steel flower, its defensive platforms dark and silent after the devourer attack. Her small squadron of 12 human vessels faced an enemy swarm that had already consumed 3 full alien battle fleets, leaving nothing but debris and the bitter taste of defeat. The devourers moved through space like living nightmares, their forms shifting between states of matter as they pleased. Some appeared as writhing masses of dark energy, while others took on the appearance of metallic predators with too many teeth. They had learned to mimic the shapes of familiar spacecraft, luring rescue vessels close before revealing their true nature. Intelligence reports suggested they fed on both organic matter and pure energy, growing stronger with each victory. Tactical analysis, Min-seo ordered, her voice carrying the steady tone that had made her legendary among human naval circles before the Great Disarmament. Lieutenant Park Sang-woo's fingers danced across his console, pulling up data that made the bridge crew tense with anticipation. Enemy numbers estimated at over 200 entities, various sizes from fighter class to dreadnought equivalent. They're moving in a standard predator swarm pattern, expecting us to group up for defensive fire. Min-seo smiled, an expression that would have seemed gentle on a civilian face but carried predatory intent on a warrior's features. What does every military academy in the galaxy teach about facing superior numbers? Concentrate your forces and fight defensively, replied Weapons Officer Sergeant Lee Young-ho, confusion evident in his voice. They were outnumbered 20-1, and conventional wisdom dictated a fighting retreat to preserved forces for the larger war. Exactly, Min-seo said, activating the fleet communications array. Which is why we're going to do the opposite. All vessels execute Scattering Protocol 7. Make them think we're running scared. The human squadron suddenly broke apart like a dropped vase, each ship veering off in a different direction. To the devourers, it must have looked like the panicked flight of prey animals, exactly the response their predatory instincts expected. The alien entities immediately gave chase, their formation stretching out as different groups pursued different targets. Captain Oh Ji-hoon watched from Kepler Station's observation deck, his face pressed against the reinforced viewport as the human ships fled in apparent terror. The Kethvar commander beside him hissed in disgust, his reptilian features expressing the disappointment of a warrior culture that valued courage above cunning. "Your humans run like cowards," growled Commander Vexkar, his scaled hands clenching into fists. "Better to die fighting than flee in shame." "Watch," Oh Ji-hoon replied quietly, his eyes tracking the seemingly chaotic movement of human vessels. "My people have a saying, the hunter becomes the hunted when he forgets to watch his back." The devourers stretched their formation thinner and thinner as they pursued their scattered prey. The creatures that had once moved as a coordinated swarm now found themselves divided into smaller hunting groups, each chasing a single human vessel across the vast emptiness of space. It was exactly what Min-seo had planned. Phase 2, she whispered into her communicator, her voice carrying across the quantum communication network that linked every human ship in the sector. The transformation was immediate and deadly. The fleeing human vessels suddenly executed precision maneuvers that would have been impossible for truly panicked crews. The destroyer Soul Defender rolled hard to starboard while its pursuer was still accelerating, bringing its main batteries to bear on the Devourer's flank. The frigate Gangnam Lightning used its pursuer's momentum to execute a perfect gravity-assisted turn around a nearby asteroid, emerging behind the confused entity with all weapons firing. But the true masterpiece was Minseo's own maneuver. The Busan fighter had been leading a pack of 6 Devourers on a merry chase through the outer asteroid field, when she suddenly killed her engines and began tumbling as if critically damaged. The Predators closed in for what they thought would be an easy kill, only to discover that the apparently crippled destroyer was the center of a carefully constructed trap. The other human vessels had been positioning themselves throughout the asteroid field, using the rocky debris to mask their energy signatures. As the Devourers converged on the seemingly helpless Busan fighter, they found themselves caught in a crossfire from every direction. Human plasma cannons lit up the darkness like artificial suns, while missile barrages streaked between the asteroids in patterns that seemed almost artistic in their precision. "Target the big one," Minseo ordered, indicating a massive devourer that appeared to be coordinating the attack. "Cut off the head, and the body dies." The concentrated fire from 12 human vessels struck the entity simultaneously, overwhelming its adaptive defenses through sheer coordinated timing. The creature dissolved into component energy, its death scream echoing across multiple dimensions as its remaining forces scattered in genuine panic. From Kepler Station, Commander Vexkar watched the battle unfold with growing amazement. "They turned retreat into attack," he murmured, his warrior's mind struggling to process tactics that violated everything he had been taught. They made the enemy's strength become weakness. The success at Kepler Station was just the beginning. Across the sector, human tactical advisors began working with alien commanders who had spent centuries fighting the same battles in the same ways. The transformation was remarkable to witness. On the Zephyrian flagship, Crystal Harmony, tactical, Advisor Lieutenant Seo Jin stood before a mixed crew of crystalline aliens and human volunteers. The Zephyrians had always fought with mathematical precision, calculating odds and deploying forces according to logical algorithms. It was effective, but predictable. "Your people think like computers," Jin explained to Captain Quinvell, the ship's crystalline commander. "That's good for many things, but war isn't always logical. Sometimes you have to make the enemy fight your battle instead of their battle." She pulled up a tactical simulation showing traditional Zephyrian formations facing a Devourer swarm. "Your ships form perfect geometric patterns, maximum firepower efficiency. But what if the enemy expects that? What if they're counting on you, being predictable?" The simulation shifted, showing the same Zephyrian vessels moving in apparently random patterns that concealed a deeper strategy. The Devourers, expecting the rigid formations, found themselves constantly out of position as the crystalline ships flowed around them like water around rocks. "Chaos with purpose," Jin concluded. "Look random, think 3 moves ahead, and always keep your real plan hidden until it's too late for them to stop it." Similar lessons were being taught across the galaxy. Kethvar warriors learned that sometimes the greatest courage was knowing when to appear weak. Altarian fleet commanders discovered that perfect formations could become perfect targets. Even the machine intelligences of the synthesis began incorporating human unpredictability into their combat algorithms. The tide of war was turning, and the galaxy was learning a lesson that humanity had mastered millennia ago. The greatest victory was not the one won through superior force, but the one won through superior thinking. The Devourers had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping for centuries, and now the universe would remember why humans had once been content to dream of peace. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had been rebuilt after the Devourer War, its crystal walls now bearing subtle scorch marks that served as permanent reminders of how close civilization had come to extinction. 6 months had passed since the last of the entities had been hunted down and destroyed in the outer void, but the echoes of that conflict still resonated through every conversation, every treaty, every nervous glance between species that had thought they understood their place in the universe. Ambassador Lee Min-ho walked through the familiar corridors with the same measured pace he had maintained for decades, but everything had changed. Where once alien diplomats had greeted him, with the casual respect accorded to a useful mediator, now they stepped aside with something approaching reverence, or fear. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Humanity was no longer seen as the galaxy's helpful neighbors, but as its sleeping guardians. The emergency session was unlike any in Council history. Representatives from 200 species filled the chamber, but for the first time in centuries the seating arrangement had shifted. The human delegation, once positioned among the smaller peaceful species, now occupied the central platform traditionally reserved for the great military powers. The change had happened naturally, without formal vote or decree, acknowledgement of a new reality that couldn't be ignored. Honored delegates, Min-ho began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation systems that now seemed inadequate for the concepts being discussed. 6 months ago, we faced extinction. Today, we face the future. The question before us is simple. What have we learned, and how do we ensure it never happens again? Behind him, holographic displays showed the new reality of galactic defense. What had once been a patchwork of individual species territories, each defended according to their own traditions and capabilities, was now an integrated network that spanned known space. Human strategic doctrine provided the backbone, but every species contributed according to their unique strengths. The Kethvar contributed their warrior spirit and powerful battleships, but now they moved with the fluid grace that human advisors had taught them. The crystalline Zephyrians maintained their mathematical precision, while incorporating the unpredictability that had made their fleets nearly unbeatable. Even the peaceful Altarians had developed defensive capabilities that protected their beautiful worlds without compromising their cultural values. We call this the Terran Doctrine, Min-ho continued, gesturing to the displays that showed integrated patrol routes, rapid response protocols, and early warning systems that covered every inhabited system. Overwhelming force used only to preserve peace. Every species contributes what they do best. No one stands alone against the darkness. Admiral Cho Hye-jin rose from her position among the military advisors, her uniform now bearing insignia that marked her as Supreme Military Coordinator. Position that hadn't existed before the war, but was now recognized as essential by every member species. Her graying hair was pulled back in the regulation style that had become familiar to alien officers across the galaxy, and her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had looked into the abyss and found a way to close it. We understand your concerns, she said, addressing the subtle tension that filled the chamber. For 3 centuries we allowed you to believe we were just another peaceful species. We hid our capabilities not to deceive you but to protect all of us, from external threats and from ourselves. The Velthari delegate, her crystalline form flickering with patterns of uncertainty, stood to voice what many were thinking. How do we know you won't use this power against us? You've shown capabilities that exceed our combined fleets. What prevents humanity from becoming conquerors? Admiral Hyjin's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. Because we've already been conquerors. We conquered our own world so thoroughly that we nearly destroyed it. We learned that winning every battle means nothing if you lose your soul in the process. That's why we chose to sleep. Because we had learned to win, and winning had taught us the value of peace. The transformation back to civilian life was already beginning across human space. The mighty shipyards that had produced the fleets which saved the galaxy were retooling for peaceful purposes once again. Weapons foundries became manufacturing centers for agricultural equipment and construction. Machinery. The warriors who had emerged from 3 centuries of enforced peace were returning to their farms, their schools, their art studios, but they carried their experiences with them. On the colony world of New Busan, Captain Song Min-jun stood in his rice fields once more, but his movements held a new awareness as he checked his crops. The irrigation systems that had been converted to defensive networks during the war now carried water to his plants. But the hidden capabilities remained, sleeping beneath the surface like seeds waiting for the right season to grow. His neighbor, the young Altarian Quintel, approached with the hesitant curiosity that had become common among alien civilians, trying to understand their human friend's dual nature. "Captain, Farmer Song, may I ask you something?" Min Jun smiled, the same gentle expression he had worn before the war, but now Quintel could see the steel beneath the kindness. "Of course, young friend, but please just call me Min Jun. I'm a farmer now, just as I was before." "But you're still a captain too, aren't you?" Quintel's crystalline features shifted with confusion. "During the war, you commanded a battle cruiser. You destroyed 12 devourer entities. How do you just go back to growing rice?" Min Jun knelt to examine a young rice plant, his weathered hands gentle as they checked the grain development. "Because this is what we fight for," he said simply. "Not the glory of battle or the thrill of victory, but the right to grow things instead of destroying them. The capacity for war is just a tool, like my harvesting equipment. I keep it clean and ready, but I only use it when necessary." The change was most visible in humanity's children, the generation that would inherit this new galaxy. In the schools of New Soul on Earth, 10-year-old Park So-jung spent her mornings practicing violin, her small fingers dancing across the strings to create melodies that spoke of beauty and hope. In the afternoons, those same fingers learned to navigate tactical displays and strategic simulations, not as games but as preparation for responsibilities she might one day bear. "Why do we learn both?" asked her classmate Kim Tae-min during their tactical theory class, his young mind struggling with concepts that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Their teacher, former Admiral Lee Kyung-ho, smiled as he answered, "Because music teaches us what we're fighting for, and tactics teach us how to protect it. One without the other makes us either helpless dreamers or mindless warriors. Together, they make us human." President Yoon Da-eun's final address to the galaxy was broadcast from the same chambers where she had announced humanity's awakening 6 months earlier, but now her words carried the weight of victory tempered by wisdom, of power constrained by choice. "We chose to sleep because we had learned to win," she said, her image reaching every world where sentient beings looked up at the stars. "We woke because others needed to learn the same lesson. Now we sleep again, but we dream with one eye open. The galaxy is safer now, not because humanity stands guard, but because all species stand guard together." The new balance was delicate, but strong. Humanity resumed its role as mediators and traders, their merchant ships once again carrying goods and culture between the stars. But now every alien captain who dealt with human crews understood the truth, that behind every friendly smile and fair deal lay the genetic memory of 10,000 years of warfare, sleeping peacefully but ready to wake if threatened. In classrooms across human space, children learned the stories of the Devourer War alongside ancient tales of Earth's heroes. They understood that power without wisdom was tyranny, but wisdom without power was helplessness. They would grow up knowing both their heritage of war and their commitment to peace, ready to choose which face of humanity the galaxy would need to see. The sleeping giant had awakened, saved civilization, and chosen to sleep again. But it dreamed, now with the knowledge that it was not alone in its vigil, and that when the next bell rang, if it ever did, the galaxy would stand united against whatever darkness emerged from the void. The end.